Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan, Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this another level.
I've seen shifts in people more than I've seen shifts in organizations. And I think the organizational shift will follow. It inevitably must. If you shift enough minds and enough hearts, the organizations that contain those people have got to change. They won't help themselves. But it's a slow process.
Who is Tobias Mayer?
Well, when I saw that question, the first thought that came to mind was Tobias Mayer, who solved the longitude problem and has a lake on the moon named after him. So I thought, that's who he is. If you Google him, without the word Agile or Scrum, that's who will come up. But who am I? Well, I'm someone who's involved in the Scrum world, and I have been for quite some years now. I came to software development quite late in life. I was in my mid-30s and fairly quickly stumbled onto XP in 1997. Before the book was written, but there were some papers out there, and I was doing some research on process at the time, and it just kind of grabbed me really. And as I moved into, I moved to the States in 1999 and started working in that industry for the first time, really. And I never was able to really practice what I'd read in the book, but I found it fascinating and I wanted to. And so I was always looking for opportunities to kind of like put into practice some of what I was seeing there, but I never really was part of a team or anything. So, but eventually I was able to, when I was made into a manager for my sins, I was able to introduce the ideas a bit more, and some of the people that I was working with at the time, we were all into it. We were doing our best to try and create a sort of an XP team out of what we had in a very top-down, management-driven organization. So that was my first real opportunity to get there. And also being a manager, I was like, how do I manage people? I had no idea. I'd never really done this before. So I started looking into it via the XP groups, and I came across Scrum. And that really touched me. I read Ken and Mike Beadle's first book, and it just resonated with everything, all the values I had in life. And so I was kind of hooked, I suppose, at that point. And I did my best to start introducing Scrum in the best way I could from just reading the book into the teams I was working with, or the one team really that I was working with. And it was sort of a blend of sort of XP-ish stuff and Scrum stuff. So we would meet. I don't think we met every day, but we did meet. I think it was 3 times a week. We got together as a team, and we did pairing. We did pairing with testers and developers side by side, which was a model actually I came across from reading an article on Microsoft. It's how they used to work, pairs of testers and developers, and I thought that was actually really successful for reducing the number of bugs found. Yeah, because we were finding bugs as we wrote them essentially.
So what happens when you get people together and just to talk to each other and collaborate.
It's amazing, yeah, it is. And we had some personality clashes, and we had to navigate our way through that. And but it wasn't XP and it wasn't Scrum, but it was better than we were doing, and we were able to show evidence that the bug counts in our projects were way lower than the average in the organization, and we got very few calls in the middle of the night to go and fix things. So clearly something was working for us, and I was able to convince the organization then to try out to Scrum proper, as it were. And so I went and got certified myself 2004, and so I became the Scrum expert after my 2-day work.
I know many people maybe don't fully understand, but what did the certification look like back in 2004?
But it looked like a piece of paper that Ken Schwaber gave to you in the classroom and wrote his signature on it and barked like a dog. I remember that. Yeah, a bit cult-like, but I don't know if he still does that or not. It was the sheepdog metaphor, playing with that, right? Yeah, it was. And actually, I had two teachers at the time, Ken Schwaber and Kurt Peterson, who was, an early Scrum adopter and trainer. Dropped out of the scene for several years, maybe 5, 6, 7 years or something, and has came back a few years ago, and he's back on board with it. I think he Kurt traveled the world to find himself, and he discovered himself back in the Scrum community. There he was all the time.
Not many people do that, that leave, but
yeah. Kurt was a great influence on me, actually. What was interesting about meeting Kurt is that prior to being a software developer, I'd worked in youth and community work, and a lot of the work I'd done was influenced by Augustus Boal, who is a theatre innovator from Brazil, who did something called Theatre of the Oppressed, based on Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed work. And so that was kind of my background that I'd come to, and I thought there was no connection between that and the software world. And then I met Kurt Peterson, and Kurt introduced Augusto Boal work into my Scrum training course, and so I was blown away. I just thought, oh, there's a connection. Everything links, and this is where I'm supposed to be. So it was really important for me that Kurt was one of the teachers, I think, that really sort of like opened my eyes to the possibilities of what this really was. It was more than just a better way of developing software. It was a way of kind of like changing organizations. I guess that's what it was. That's what the realization was at the time. Because the place I had worked in and the one before that were just top down, the usual hierarchical, management driven organizations that didn't get much done. And so
and like, how much what do you think as far as psychology, like understanding people, how much does it have to do, obviously, with the other side of things, of understanding people and culture, when it comes to Scrum, when it comes to
well, it has everything to do with that, I think, doesn't it? I mean, that's sort of it's the root. I mean, Ken and Scrum, of course, came about several years before the Agile Manifesto was written, but the values that went into the manifesto came out of Scrum in part, and other things too, of course. Kent Beck, who developed Extreme Programming, Ron Jeffries, they were signees, and Ron and Jeff Sutherland were Ken and Jeff Sutherland were also signees of that. So they all did what they were already doing, right? And so the value that says we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, that was alive, and that's what they were doing. They were valuing people, and so the training was very much focused on that, and focused on the idea of cross-functional teams. That was a novelty to me as well. I remember one of the aha moments from that workshop, and it was, well, gosh, several years ago now, wasn't it? It was when I asked a question about, I can't remember exactly how the question was phrased. It was something to do with handoffs from UX and UI people, and I was told that there was no need for handoffs in Scrum, and I just couldn't get my head around it at all. I thought, well, how can you possibly not have handoffs from UX? I got that you didn't have to have handoffs to testers. I could just about grasp that, but the idea of like UX was a different world in the organization. I was in a different building. The people were strange, and we never talked to them, and they sent us emails and we didn't understand them, and they sent us mock-ups that we couldn't code because it didn't make sense. So the idea that we didn't have to do that anymore was just it took me a while to really figure that one out.
So it's a big mindset shift. And I mean, like, even the Agile Manifesto, and I was just I participate or watched the first part that was organized for the 20th anniversary, and it's pretty clear, the 6 signeries that were there, they talked about just how much it is about the mindset, the being part of Agile, rather than the doing part, and it's a combination of the both. But do you see that with what is your understanding? What's the current state of Agile? Or Agile movement, or whatever you want to call it, but reflecting back, what do you think? What is the current state, and is it a good state? I know you've sometimes talked about that this is a necessary progression, or that at least some of the things that I've heard you saying, right, that it's not necessarily bad it's part of the change, or I don't know what the correct term is, but what is your thought on where things are today, 2021?
Well, to be honest, I don't really think about it that much. I got to say, I don't spend lots
that's
about the state of agility, but
yeah.
when I'm pushed, I do. Really, if we think about it, when was the manifesto written? 2001, right? So it's 20. Yeah, you just said 20 years. And Scrum's been around since the mid-90s, early mid-90s. And there've been various other efforts put in before that to try and kind of shift the way we do things. But it's all pretty new, really, isn't it? It's still relatively new compared to everything else that we've followed on from. Going way back into the Industrial Revolution and so on, and some of the management methods that we've pulled from that. So it's going through teething problems, and it will for some time. I think it's the idea that we could expect it to suddenly transform things, and I naively did, and many of us do, and good for us that we have that naivety. Otherwise, nothing would get started, would it? If we were all cynics and it would never work. We are naive. We have been, and we're enthusiastic and we're passionate as well, and that's where this does work, even though it doesn't work. It doesn't really shift things. It doesn't really change anything, because the organizations are so rooted in business as usual, the way things are. It's very, very hard to move that. But there is successes, of course. Anyone listening to this will probably go, well, that's not my story. My story is different. My story is it was successful and we did make a shift and we did change things. And I've had some experiences like that too. I've seen shifts in people more than I've seen shifts in organizations. And I think the organizational shift will follow. It inevitably must. If you shift enough minds and enough hearts, the organizations that contain those people have got to change. They won't help themselves. But it's a slow process. See, one of the problems we run into with the larger organizations, and this was my experience over several years of seeing change take hold in an organization and be championed. And that's key, right? We talk about needing a champion. But then the champion leaves. The champion is usually an executive, a fairly senior executive, and the champion leaves and is replaced by someone else who is bringing their own style, their own ideas, their own people into the organization. And they don't want to just pick up what they see as the mess that was left behind by the last guy. This is nonsense, we're not going to do that. So they fire all the agile coaches or on Scrum Masters, and the teams just have to report back to their managers. No more self-organization because no one can track that. And they bring in better tracking tools, and then it all goes away again. And then after several years, this is a true story of an organization I was with. Several years go by and it comes back again, and it comes back in force because someone else is championing it. And then it goes through the same things. It goes up and then it goes down and it goes up. And then I went back to that organization, I don't know, 10 years after they fired me for trying to do Agile. And they hired me as an Agile coach there. And so they were back on the upward slope, but they had also just hired a new CEO who didn't like Agile. And so during my 2 years of being there, I saw it crumble again. It wasn't my fault. It was on the cards already. I just got hired at the wrong time there. But while I was there, and the people I worked with there, I could see a great desire and a passion to move away from this kinds of structures they were forced to work in into something that gave them more autonomy. And I think that, for me, that's the bottom line of it.
Yeah.
Work in an environment where we have autonomy, we have some control. And when people don't have that, they get ill. They get mentally ill, they get physically ill, and they get burnt out. And so people are recognizing that, and people are requiring it, and they're demanding it, in fact.
Yeah, and it's, working with senior leaders in companies too, they don't have it easy. Like, it's easy to point the finger to the executives and say, hey, you don't get it. But what is your experience like? What do they go through? What type of pressure? How does system kind of force them to act in a way that, and I'm talking about organizational system, to act in the way that they do?
Well, I'll answer that in a moment, but is it also important to know that it's not just management and it's not just executives that resist this. It's also people in the grassroots of an organization who don't want to change the way they do things. They like what they do, and they're comfortable They're in their comfort zone, right? And we're pushing them out of it, and that's not always a kind thing to do. And I thought about it once when I was trying to work with a group of people whose management were basically saying, you can do what you like, you can figure this out, you can self-organize, you can tell us what's wrong and we'll fix it. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do any of it. And they didn't want to. And it took me a while to get my head around that. Why don't they give this a massive, brilliant opportunity they've been given here? But then it dawns on me that when they were hired for the job that they're doing, they were hired under a contract, essentially, right? And the contract was, here's your manager, you'll do what he's told, you'll do what he tells you to do, and at the end of the year, you'll get rewarded if you're good. That's the traditional way of doing things. And suddenly they're being told that's not what you are anymore. Now you have to make decisions, right? I didn't get this job to make decisions. I got this job so people could tell me what to do. And so suddenly they're like making decisions. They're supposed to talk to customers, all of the things that they perhaps wouldn't have joined that company if they knew about that. So it's almost violent. I think it's almost violent when we ask people to, shift that quickly. It's not always desired. That's the point, right? So the resistance comes in. People say, I don't want to do this, I'm not interested. And I've had developers on teams who've done their best to undermine and break it. And it only takes one or two to derail things, So
well, that too, and like I've had people, like even when we talk about the physical space, people that are so used to it, that has nothing to do with going into open space or environment, but there's something that they're used to and that what they like. I remember I was coaching one organization, and I remember his name, Mike, told me, Miljan, this is too much for me. This whole change and going now into this open space is forcing me to look for other opportunities, because it's not that I hate Agile, it's not that I hate open space, it's just I can't handle it right now.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find really annoying about the way people try to embrace Agile in organizations. So, companies I've worked for and with have come from cubicle culture, which clearly isn't the best way of operating. And then they knock all the cubicles down and make this massive open space where everyone can see everything, and there's visual noise in there. And so what people do, there's visual noise and there's audible noise as well, because now you've got no walls to block out the noise. And you're working in this giant space with all these people, you don't know who they are, they're not part of your team, you don't interact with them. And so what people then did is they put screens around their chair and they put headphones on. So they're now more isolated than they were at least in cubicles, we had the option to break the walls down a bit. We would take panels out and chat to each other through the walls. But now people are doing the opposite. They're closing themselves off. So the move towards open space offices is the wrong move. It's not, that's not going to solve anything. It creates more problems, in fact. So what do we want? I don't know. The caves and commons model that Paul Hodgetts introduced to me back in 2004. Which is, it's a nice term, isn't it? It's like there's a common area where people work as a team, and there are little areas where they can go off and work by themselves if they want to. So that's quite a nice thing. So team rooms is the thing, isn't it? Is that you want the noise that your team makes is important noise. It's useful noise. It's noise that's going to help you do the work. The noise of other teams is just noise. It's noise you don't need and you don't want and isn't going to help you. So the principle for me is work as closely as you can with the people who are on your team, working on the same product as you, and as far away from everyone else as you can. That would be the balance to find for me.
Yeah, I mean, and coming back to the senior leadership and executives, a lot of times decision, and just to come back also to the idea of open space, one of the reasons that executives like this idea and talking to them is that they can move people from 3 buildings into 2 buildings, and it's going to save them money. And therefore, they're going to look good because, hey, now it's not about open space, or this is about saving money and moving from 3 buildings, which is very expensive, into 2 buildings that will, get everybody to, to collaborate. So when it comes to executives and decision making and how they're incentivized, what are your kind of thoughts and experiences in that realm?
Well, yeah, to go back to the question about the executive management and helping them make the shift. Many of them do, as we know. Many of them champion this, and it's usually those people that hire people like me to come in. They hire, looking for an agile consultant or coach or mentor or something, and they bring us into the organization. Now, the problem with that is there's many problems actually, but I'm thinking of one particular case where I said, I was talking to this C something, smallish company. Chief technical officer he was, and his complaint was the teams, they want to do Scrum at the organization, the teams can't do it, so I need me to come in. Basically, the message was come in and fix the teams. Now today I'd be much wiser and I wouldn't do that, but I did do it. But I also said to him, I said, I'd really like it if you joined the 2-day workshop I'm going to run with your teams. And he said, I don't need to, I know Agile. That was his response. Of course, he actually didn't know much about Agile at all. What he thought Agile was being able to change his mind whenever he wanted to and have people respond to that. That's what he thought being Agile was. And he was getting
only
angry.
if it serves me type of thing. Yeah.
Exactly, it serves him, yeah. The problem in general, that story aside, I think with some executive management is the Peter principle, which you're probably familiar with, right?
I don't think no.
You are. When I say it, you will be. You might know it by a different name. It's the idea that people get promoted to their level of incompetence. Right? You familiar with that? No. Okay. So the idea is that in a hierarchical system, you get promoted on the basis that you know how to do the work and you're good at what you do.
Okay. Yeah.
You're good at what you do at this level, so you get promoted to this level. Now,
yes. I get it. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
You really got the skills to get good at that. So you have to work really hard to get the skills to that. And if you get it, you move to the next level. Exactly. But every time you move up one, you are now at a new level of incompetence that you have to become competent at. Until such time you can't get competent anymore. You're
you get bored. It's a carrot and stick type of thing where, like, if
what you've got then is you've got a structure of incompetent people leading an organization because of that principle. And it's said in jest, but it's actually true to a large extent. Now the problem with it is that people can't admit that they are at their level of incompetence, otherwise all hell will break loose, right? So they have to bluff. So we've got these hierarchical levels of managers bluffing their way through their day, acting like they know stuff, and so they can't admit they don't know. So this guy telling me he knows Agile, he has to know Agile. He's a CTO, right? He reports to the CEO. He has to know Agile. If he admits he doesn't know, that's a problem, right? So if he comes to my workshop, that's like him saying, I have to learn something. And so he can't do it because he can't learn because he knows already. And so that's why we get lots of people who don't know much in leading organizations. So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge, and I'm making a caricature out of it, sure. But within the jest, there is a lot of truth in that, and I think we need to be looking out for that tendency in some of the leaders that we work with, the tendency to feel like they already know. We all do that to some.
Yeah, and I think also along those lines too, because of the silos and general specialization that we've seen in organizations, you also got promoted by, if you're a developer and you get promoted, you were kind of promoted through the silo, and then ultimately when you're responsible for something that's more end to end, you don't have a full experience or understanding of the whole system. And sometimes I've seen that can be limiting factor as well because of that specialty. And not necessarily that it's bad. It's just that people, for instance, that get promoted through one silo don't fully understand or empathize with others.
Yeah. That's not that. Yeah, they don't need to, right? You need to, if you're an engineering manager, you need to understand how to write code and how to get other people to write code. You don't have to understand anything about tech. That's someone else's job, isn't it? Yeah. It's all, we know the structures of organizations cause the siloed structures cause lots of problems. Yeah, but this syndrome of thinking we know things. I was just thinking recently, my wife asked me why I don't go to many Agile conferences anymore. And I said, because there's nothing more I can learn. I know it all. And when I said that, I thought, oh my God, I've become like, um, but I said it, I meant it, because I really felt like to be fair, there are, a lot of Agile conferences are speaking to people who are new to Agile, which is fair enough. That's who we need to speak to. And, but I got this level of arrogance where it's like, it doesn't apply to me anymore. But happily, I recently did a certified Scrum product owner training as a participant. I joined the class with Arbid Qureshi. And what a fantastic class, by the way. That was a fantastic class. And I learned a lot. I learned an awful lot from him, and I didn't learn about Scrum, but I learned how he sees Scrum, and I learned his experience of Scrum, and I learned angles of viewing Scrum and XP. In fact, he talked about that a fair bit, or not so much XP, but software development. And everything he did related back to the Agile Manifesto, which is something I've drifted away from. So that anchored me back in there. So it was a lovely learning experience, and it reminded me that I don't know everything.
And that reminds me of just like how much I love co-training, and you've co-trained, I'm assuming, with Ken and others. Like, how much did you enjoy that? Do you miss that part of learning? Because I feel like I learned so much when I co-train or just pair with anybody to do anything. I feel like I learn a lot.
I do. I mean, the way I structure classes now is that almost everyone's facilitating something, so there's a multi-way learning going. But back in the early days, I co-trained with Ken a couple of times, and it was very much his class and me doing a little bit here and there. But following that, I worked in the early days. It seemed like pairing was natural and everyone was doing it, and then it became a bit more about the money, because when you've got two trainers, it's might be a nicer experience for the participants, but you're only making half the amount. But I worked with Michael James a lot in the early days, and I worked with Lisa Atkins on a couple of occasions, and a whole host of other people. Carlton, who we were just talking about, he and I paired on CSM a few times. So part of it was to help people to become CSTs themselves, so that a lot of the co-training was on that. But in the earlier days, when it was Kane Marr and Michael James and Victor Salvi and myself, we would pair just as a matter of course, because we were all CSTs already. We weren't teaching each other anything. We were just learning from each other in the styles and stuff like that. Yeah, it was good.
Do you miss that? Do you miss those?
I do to some extent, and I still partner with people, but it's in somewhat different ways now. Like I've recently struck up a partnership with a guy, a Belgian guy called Francis Leilman, who he works on my certified Scrum Master training as a product owner. So we have the teams build products, and he's the product owner for that because he's an educator. And so what the teams are building are educational tools using Scrum. So I've got that kind of partnership now, which is somewhat different to being co-training. I'm a customer, he's a product owner. The team, the participants are teams, and then I have Scrum Masters who are experienced people who've done the workshop before, practice it, come in and work as Scrum Masters with the team. So we recreate the whole kind of Scrum structure in a 3-day workshop. It's been fun. It's a different kind of. But I learn a lot from all of the Scrum Masters I work with, and from Francis and the participants. Yeah, so I still have that experience of collaboration, I'd say, now. But I went through a few years of not having it so much. Definitely.
Yeah. So coming into this, I didn't know this before, that you kind of shifted careers, and in your early mid-30s made that shift. If you could go back in time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him? Like, because I think about this a lot of times, obviously through a lot of stuff that I've been through, both personally, growing up in Boston, living through the war, and then coming to United States. Obviously, it's all based on decisions, even decision that my dad decided to come here, and having opportunity to just even think about what would I do if I, had the knowledge that I have today. So what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Well, whenever that question, whenever I get asked that question, which is not often, I have to say,
Yeah.
but the sort of general feel. I mean, you sometimes think about what would have happened if I had made this decision instead of that decision.
You don't know, right? It's obviously one thing leads to another, but maybe let me put it this way: what would you recommend to somebody today that's 18-year-old, based on your experience and knowledge, what you know today? Maybe not to yourself, but to somebody that's that's undecided what they want to do in life, and anything is possible.
Yeah, I'm not much of an advice giver. I have two sons who live in the States actually now, and one is, gosh, how old are they? Like 26 and 24, I think, something like that. So and I tried not to give them too much advice because they didn't see me as a particularly successful person. So I was going to hold off on that. But I think, the advice really is make your own mistakes. That would be my advice for anybody. We don't want to make other people's mistakes. We don't want other people to tell us not to do X because of the outcome of that. And we all fall into that with our own kids probably. Listen to me, I know better. I've made that mistake. You don't have to make it. But I think sometimes we do. We do have to make our own. And I've made plenty of mistakes. But I think another bit of advice that might be useful, and I might give this to my own 18-year-old self, is don't regret the past.
Yeah.
You do, and you use it. You utilize your screw ups and your mistakes and your failings and your embarrassments. You utilize it in some way and move forward on it.
That's a really good one, and that one that I can definitely relate to. Last time, I think it's been a couple of months ago, I attended a webinar that you participated in. The topic was of metaphors. And you're big on storytelling, metaphors. What are your favorite metaphors when it comes to that you use and that you share with others?
Well, a colleague of mine, Carrie, was working as a Scrum Master on one of my CSMs, and she very kindly wrote down all the metaphors that I came up with, and she took it on herself, project or something. But it was fun to read my own words back, well, in her words. Are you talking about metaphors for Scrum or
any? I mean, it's really like which ones resonate, which ones do you speak about frequently when you're teaching or when you're talking to somebody. For instance, I have several that I use and teach. Which ones do you find yourself using more frequently than not?
It varies and it changes according to it. Sort of the metaphors themselves emerge out of the conversation, so I don't really. But there are certain things that I fall back on. I use the gardening metaphor quite a lot. When I talk about Scrum, and organize. The Scrum Master role in an organization is like a gardener nurturing the soil, creating the right environment for the plants to grow. He isn't a plant, and he doesn't shout at the plants to make them grow. He just and he doesn't get annoyed when they don't grow because he looks back at what's wrong with the environment. And so that metaphor of a good gardener taking care of the soil, I think, is really useful for people trying to do organizational change. We focus way too much on trying to change the people. We forget, we know systems thinking, we forget about the system, but the system is not just the processes that we do, it's what the room looks like, just what I was talking about earlier, the giant open shared space, and looking around and seeing people crouching over their computers with their headphones on and their screens around them, and being aware of that and figuring out how you can, because that's like it's like toxic soil essentially. So what do you do? Perhaps a more accurate metaphor would be an organic gardener. It's not just any old gardener. Right? So it's not a gardener who puts chemicals over everything to get rid of the problem. It's like going down to really nuts and bolts of it and cleansing, an act of cleansing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would it be more like a community garden too, where it's not just your
Yeah,
own garden, but
yeah, would be. You could say you can take exactly. You can take that metaphor, can't you? And you can play with it. And but yeah, I do like that. The other metaphor I use for which a lot of people really dislike, I have to say, but it works so well for me, is the Old Testament prophet, Scrum Master. Right. So let
Mhm,
me explain that one. Right. Prophets are not about telling the future. They're about seeing where people are straying and helping them get back on the path. So the Old Testament
mhm,
prophets, the Bible is basically an endless tale, it seems, of people doing the wrong thing. That's really, when you
mhm,
look at it, it's continuously people just doing the wrong thing and making mistakes and messing up and not keeping to the law. And the prophet suddenly arises out of the midst of these people, and he tells them what's going on. He speaks truth to power. He talks to kings, and he talks to
mhm,
people. And he tries to get them. He says, and the telling of the future is like, if you keep doing this, this will happen. And if you don't want that to happen, then don't do those things. And we can say the same thing in organizations. And Scrum Masters do that. If we continue to reward individuals, you will get individual behavior. You will not have teams. Right? We can
mhm,
predict that because it's going to become true. So that's us telling the future. So, and our job as Scrum Masters is to say, if you're choosing to do Scrum, right, if that's a choice that you've made, then do it properly. Don't half-heartedly.
mhm.
Don't say, well, we're kind of doing Scrum, but we don't have stand-up meetings. That's like straying off the path. Scrum Master's job is to say, well, okay, you can do that if you want to, but let's not pretend we're abiding by the laws of Scrum
Mhm.
for what it's worth. So, I mean,
Yeah, and what
personally,
I like about it too, I'm thinking back about the what we just spoke about, the parenting, right? And I think the big difference here is like it sounded like from parenting, don't do this, do this, right? But I think one of the important things that you just said is if you decide to do Scrum, do it
yeah,
correctly. And I think there's a big difference versus telling versus saying if that's your decision, that's what you want to do,
mm.
then at least do it how it's
Yeah.
Scrum.
The zealous approach to this would be like forcing, and this does, of course, this happens in some organizations, forcing people to do Scrum,
Hmm.
um, and they won't want to. If they don't want to, they won't do it, and they will. It's easy to break, isn't it? After all. But when organizations are saying they choose to do Scrum, then the Scrum Master's job is to keep them on the path. That's all. And look around at the environment and so on. But when people are saying we're not going to do this bit, or we're going to do this instead, if you don't have an understanding of the why behind it all, then you could mess it up, and
Yeah.
and then we can kind of predict where that's going to go. It's going to start falling apart. I remember organizations saying to me when they're starting off with Scrum and they're doing really well with it, and suddenly some catastrophe hits, some horrible bug is reported from the field, and everyone's in a panic. And they say, we're going to stop doing Scrum until we fix this problem, and then we'll come back to it, as if Scrum is somehow getting in the way of
Yeah.
strange. And of course, they don't go back to it.
Hmm.
So the Scrum Master's
Is
job is
that yeah? Is
don't do that.
that what is something that people seem to misunderstand most about Agile? Is that like that Agile is just or Scrum is just a tool or an option, or what do you think is the most misunderstood thing either about Agile or Scrum specifically?
I think people have all kinds of weird understandings about it. The example I gave earlier was Agile means being able to change your mind anytime you want to. Now,
Hmm.
that's not altogether untrue. It is about when we have better ideas, we want to be able to follow the better ideas. But when you've just got one person in the organization changing their mind and saying, "Don't do that, do this instead," it's interrupt-driven development all over again, isn't it? Under the guise of Agile.
Hmm.
So people, and then I can't speak for Agile in general. I mean, Agile and Scrum get muddled quite a lot, don't they? Get conflated. But when organizations are doing Scrum, or they say that we're doing Agile now, and we've got product owners, they've got junior BAs being told they're now product owners with absolutely no decision-making ability,
Hmm.
no power at all, basically, for anything. So you've got a flaccid product owner. So you're not really doing Scrum.
Mm-hmm.
And the Scrum Master is usually, another junior developer or someone who's like a manager, a release manager or something like that, who's told that they're a Scrum Master. They even rename the role in a lot of situations. It's not that any of those things in themselves are bad. They might work for you, but clearly they're not what we understand about as being Scrum or Agile. If we're not following the principles of the Agile Manifesto, we're not doing Agile.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing all of the 10 practices of XP. We're not doing XP. We're doing something else, and we need to call it by what it is.
Yeah. What I'm seeing too is like kind of what you just said about the Scrum Master is like the role is so misunderstood. Yet, at least here in the United States, it's paid very well. So when I talk to leaders and people that are making decisions around, hiring and, the structure of the teams, they can't see in their heads a justification to pay somebody 100 to 170K here for a facilitation role. So they resort to, okay, we're gonna have somebody facilitate. And a couple of years ago, I wrote an article. Essentially, it was titled "Demise of the Scrum Master Role," and a couple of points that I made is that most Scrum Masters are not trying to be better Scrum Masters. They go take a 2-day class, and it's a promotional job. I'm moving from project manager to this new role. And the other one is that organizations are not seeing the value. Are you seeing same things? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I see that too. I mean, the Scrum Master role has been kind of crushed into like a team admin assistant or something.
Mm-hmm.
Schedules meetings and of course they're not going to pay someone to do that as a full-time job. People miss the point. I don't know how they miss it. It's so clear in the Scrum Guide. There are 3 focuses for the Scrum Master. You focus on the team, and you focus on the product owner, and you focus on the organization as a whole, which is massive, right? It's massive. You've got
Exactly.
thousands of people sometimes. Now, how is that not a full-time job? Of course it is, but people think that the Scrum Master is, they think, oh, I know what it is. It's they've got this idea because of the hierarchical structures we have. Jalal and I did a video on this one time. The difference between a Scrum Master and an Agile coach, right? So now Scrum Masters work with the teams, Agile coaches work with the organization, right? And they're higher paid, they're better qualified, and we need for them, right? You, Scrum Master, you can stay with the team and make the coffee and schedule the meetings and report on them and give us some charts and things, and we'll get a proper Agile coach to come in and do the rest. So there is no, in most HR departments, there's no slot to put Scrum Masters in, right? So they have to rename them as something else, some kind of manager or something, or project manager or release manager or something like that. But the role of coach is a bit more well known in organizations. I think it's kind of a bit more respected as a role, and it might even be an HR slot for that one. So you can be a coach in most corporations. You can't really be a Scrum Master because it doesn't fit anywhere. It's a whole new role.
Which points to
in a pack of cards. There's not real. Where's the place for the Joker when you're sorting out your cards into decks? It's no place, right? The Joker's wild. That's the Scrum Master, right? And we have to be able to embrace that in organizations. And when we can't, we try pigeonholing them, and then they become something else. The problem.
And that points to HR, right? Like, if HR doesn't see how it needs to involve, if finance doesn't see how it involves within the organization, those can be sometimes limiting or impeding factors, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There are people who are working on Agile HR at the moment. Natal Dunk is one of them. She wrote a book recently about Agile HR. So there's little, and Jem Jalal, my friend, he's known as Gem Jelly on.
I know, I love the stuff that he's doing, and I'm gonna try to interview him too, because I do really appreciate everything that he's doing. And
yeah, but he's been working, less so now, but several years ago he was working with HR people. He was labor of love. It was very much. He would run workshops with HR people and recruiters, particularly recruiters. Yeah, so there's inroads being made into all these parts of the organization. Finance is another one, yeah, probably less so there, but marketing certainly. And
Mhm.
so, uh, but this is early days. It really is still early days. We say it's 20 years on, but that's nothing in the history of organizations, is it? It's really
Exactly.
very new still.
So what do you think is next? I mean, I know it's hard, obviously, to predict. We can't really predict, but what are some of the patterns that you're seeing that might be different than what we've seen in the last 10 years?
Well, it's hard for me to say that from where I am at the moment, because
Mhm.
since I moved back to the UK in 2016, and I've done almost no corporate work
Mhm.
in the last years now. So most of my work now is public facing workshops.
Mhm.
So I, rather than going into organizations, I entice people out of organizations.
I saw
Uh,
you post that it's probably been a couple of years ago, maybe. But that's a good way
you
to
know,
put it.
I'm going against the general wisdom of meet people where they are.
Yeah.
I want people where
You said
where-
something along the lines like, I have no interest in going back in, or something like that. I don't know.
yeah, I
But
wrote that. And I don't, to be honest, I don't, because I woke up to the fact in the last consulting work I did in a company that full of wonderful people that I had really had a good time working with, but the structure was so rigid, it just wasn't able to change.
Mhm.
And the actual software they were working on was, so broken, it was never going to survive. And it didn't, in fact. But I came to the realization that for me, it was sheer folly to think that I could change an organization. It was hubris.
Mhm.
Um, I can help people to change the way they think about their work. I can do that, and I do that. But I can't, and I don't think I've ever changed an organization. I never have. No. I'm changing organizations of the future, not organizations of the present. That's what I believe. So if I didn't
Mhm.
even believe that, I wouldn't be doing this at all, I suppose, would I? So you have to have some purpose in the world.
Some, yeah, and so
So
maybe that, like you said earlier, that a little bit of that naiveness of just even false belief,
yeah.
but something that you still believe in and that motivates you. Mindset and culture are pretty big buzzwords. How do you see culture? Like, how do you define culture?
I'm very wary of the idea of changing culture.
Hmm.
That's what missionaries did in Africa a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
Didn't end up well, did it? Um, changing someone else's culture, that's the height of arrogance, surely. So the idea we can go in and say we're gonna help you shift your culture, unless you're really, really, truly invited in for that purpose, you need to tread very warily.
But what
Culture is
is that? What is it like?
uh,
How would you define, before even we talk about changing the culture? What is culture from your perspective? How would you
well, I know what it
describe
is
it to? Yeah.
in terms of uh, groups of people in the world, but in an organization, we've kind of co-opted that word a bit, haven't we, in our organizations, or
Mhm.
organizational culture. I mean, it's just the culture of an organization is its patterns, I suppose, isn't it? It's its patterns and its traditions and its stories. That's what the culture is of an organization.
Mhm.
The stories they tell, the patterns they work to, that
Mhm.
kind of creates the culture. And so I suppose, we talk about culture change. I guess what we mean is we're going to tell different stories. We're going to
Mhm.
introduce new patterns, um, but it has to be a collaborative event. We can't. If people are expecting us to come in and impose agile, which is really what a lot of people ask for, come and make my company agile. Right. So
Mhm.
I'm coming in like a missionary into that to help the poor natives, to change their horrible culture into the culture that I approve of. Right, that's kind of the bare bones of that approach. So the good consultants go in and
Mhm.
they listen to the stories, and they observe the patterns, and they work with people to explore whether those patterns are the best patterns, and are there other patterns we can use? Are there other stories we can tell?
So that it's almost like you can apply that to the mindset too. We talk about changing mindset, and it's also rude to go and say, "I want to change your mindset." It probably that same approach of listening, understanding the patterns, and then seeing if changing the mindset is actually beneficial or not. Would you say that is there a correlation there between the culture and mindset?
There is, and there's something curious about that term mindset, isn't there? Because the last thing we want in an agile environment is a set mind. We want an open mind, we want a moving mind, we want a amorphous mind, a mind that is changeable, malleable. We don't want a set mind. So we talk about changing the mindset. It might be the wrong metaphor. We want to change something else. It might not be the set of the mind. We don't want to go from one set mind to a different set mind, because then you're kind of stuck in this new truth, which is now being saying everyone has to follow this truth. And my mind is set on doing agile. I don't want to work with people whose mind is set on doing agile. I want to work with people who want to explore newness, better things.
So maybe broaden their perspectives is another way to look at it. Who are willing to broaden their perspectives and
broaden. That's a nice way of thinking of it, isn't it? Broaden perspectives, or move your mind, perhaps open your mind.
Great.
Of course, there's the other side of it. Someone pulled me up on this keeping an open mind thing. Is if you've got a mind that's too open, your brains fall out.
Well, there's something to be said about not going to any extreme, right?
Yeah. You want to keep an open mind, but you also have to be discerning, which requires judgment. You have to make assessments, and you can't embrace everything. So. I mean, most of the work of helping organizations change is very little. Well, that's not fair. I was going to say very little is about, the software they develop, but actually quite a lot is about the software they develop. But it can't live independently from helping the rest of the organization support that work. So I suppose it's cultural. I don't love that word. I don't like using it really, but if it is about patterns and stories and traditions and process, then we can help organizations look at those things and address them differently. So maybe I don't have to keep doing this.
And that resonates with me. And the way that I usually describe culture, it's a reflection, right, of the systems, of the practices, behaviors, habits, right. The mind are perspectives, collective perspectives. So it's more of a reflection, and you can't change the reflection. You change the other things in order to change that reflection. So
that's a nice way of looking at it. Yeah. So I don't know.
Well,
I'm not. I feel like I'm on the fringe of all of this whole agile movement. Really, I wasn't around at the beginning when this was all formed, and I love them. I love the Agile Manifesto. I kind of forget about it and kind of move away. That was what was nice about doing Arbit's workshop, was bringing me back to center in a sense on that. It's a powerful document. I like that it's not changed a single word in 20 years, and I might be unusual for that because everyone says we have to update the Agile Manifesto, but we don't. It's a document of its time, and it's an anchor. If we start changing it, we lose the anchor. The Scrum Guide hasn't done itself much favor, I think, by continually changing. I kind of get it, it's useful, and then you get people who don't like it, and there's aspects of the new Scrum Guide I don't like. I really cringe at the word accountability. It's an awful word.
But isn't that, I see frameworks like Scrum, and maybe it's too naive of me to say that, but it's like a recipe, right? So if you have a recipe and collection of patterns, of course, with time, recipes evolve. People have different opinions on it. And, if you're from a culinary perspective, if you're not looking at the essence of that dish and you're just looking at the recipe and ingredients, you're going to want people to change the ingredients. They don't necessarily want to change the outcome, which is delicious meal, but they want to change the actual a recipe just because we're humans. We love, to mix
Yes,
it up
it's great.
sometimes.
Yeah, I think that the Scrum Guide is there, and as you and I are both trainers of this. We teach Scrum. We certify people in Scrum. We have to have a basis for that, right? And that's what
Correct. Yeah.
right, that's what the Scrum Guide is. And when the Scrum Guide changes, we change what we teach. Now, it's like you said, we're not changing the outcome, but we're changing some of the ingredients. So now, instead of talking about roles, now we talk about accountabilities, because that's what the Scrum Guide tells us to talk about. And I'm okay with that. I have no problem with that. But if I wasn't doing certification, and during those years that I wasn't teaching certification, I didn't worry too much about what was written in the Scrum Guide. I don't think I ever read it, in fact. I knew what Scrum was in its essence, and you can write what Scrum is in half a page probably, and capture, or a page perhaps, and capture everything about what it is. And that's what the Scrum Guide says. It says what Scrum is. When I teach Scrum, I try to teach why we do Scrum. I teach the why of Scrum. The document, the guide, tells us what, and the how is in the action, isn't it? It's in the doing of it. People will figure out how to do Scrum by doing Scrum. The guide is only there to tell you what to do, like have a planning meeting. Common sense, of course.
How many students do you have that come in and want to know the why versus the what and how?
Yeah, well, a lot of them, they all want to know it, I think, but they don't know that they want to know it necessarily.
Yeah.
I think for anything we do, we want to know why we're doing it.
Correct. Yeah.
We're not good at complying. We've been taught how to comply in our school systems, and now in the corporate world immediately following that. But it's not a natural thing to do. It's a natural thing. It's good to learn from people who know stuff to some extent, but we also need to make our own mistakes, and we also need to do our own explorations, because that's how progress is made, by people coming in with new ideas. Like, I love having junior people join senior teams, because they come at it with a whole different way of looking,
different perspective. Yeah,
they'll pull the rug out. They might not always be right, but they'll get us kind of shaken up a bit. So we need that. So compliance is not. Nobody really wants to comply. People want to have a sense of like being in control of the work that they do. And if you understand why we do Scrum, you get that. It allows people to really embrace it, to recognize the importance of it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think and also through doing people, and I think the reason that Agile is where it is and Scrum is, as popular as it is, and Alistair Cockburn said something in this latest 20th anniversary that individuals' interactions over process and tools was the best thing that they did by putting it as the first value in the Agile Manifesto, because so many people resonated with that statement and the why behind that statement.
I would agree with that, absolutely. Yeah, it has that primary place in there, and that's where it should be. Absolutely. And it was written about how to develop software, and it has the word software in it a number of times. And people want to use it for other things, and that's fine. You can adapt it for sure. But it is essentially written about software development. And I think it's important to remember that, because there's something about the nature of developing software that is different to most other things. And the principles around it, it was also, all of those Agile practices were built around object-oriented programming. There's a particular kind of program, a particular kind of way of looking at the world, if you like. And that matters. And I think that if we lose, that's why we can do incremental delivering of value in small pieces, because we've got the right model for it. We're not trying to do these big bang releases of things, which you might have to do if you were using different patterns to build your software. So there's some dependencies in there. The Agile Manifesto is dependent on software, and it's dependent on the object model. I would guess, I don't know, because like I said, I wasn't part of the group that put that together, of course, but people doing most of those teams are doing small talk and some of that, which is pure object. So you get away from it. But it's important to remember that. And this is part of doing Arbit's workshop, was I was re-reminded of the importance importance of that, and so we can take the principles of the Agile Manifesto, but remember where they came from and understand where they came from as well. Like if you've never learned how to code and you don't know what an object model is, learn that first and then apply your Agile Manifesto to marketing.
Principle as well as, yeah. That's a really good point. So.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Tobias. I know we're over time, and I really enjoyed our conversations. And this is why I, wanted to kind of start this, because I don't get a chance. I don't get a chance to do this. Obviously, at conferences, we had a little bit of opportunity to do this, but not as much because obviously there's a lot more people and a lot more going on. So I hope that you enjoyed the conversation today as much as I did, because.
It was lovely to meet you. It really was, having read some of your writing as well, and particularly the stuff that you relate back to your early years. I found that fascinating, and how you connect it all. I love it when people do that. Just like everything connects. It really does. And if we forget where we've come from, then we get lost, I think. And so you rooted what you wrote back into that. It was lovely. So it made me want to meet you, and here I am.